Hi guys, it's Steffi from the Novelty Corner. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my Books Beside My Bed video. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this series, I film one of these every week where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading, and for those who are very familiar with the series, welcome back. This is my reading week from the 5th until the 11th of April. I read 12 books this week, 1 young adult book and 11 adult books. I read a total of 3,293 pages and my yearly reading total is up to 122 books. I was participating in the OWLS Readathon, which I did complete this week, and I think I filled one Romanceopoly challenge this week as well. Without further ado, I'm going to get straight into the wrap up. Obviously talking about so many books, I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible so that we're not here forever. So grab a cup of tea or a coffee or a drink or something to keep you company while you watch the video. And let's go. The first book that I read this week was Magic Breaks by Lona Andrews. This is book 7 in the Kate Daniels series. It was published in 2014 by Ace and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I read this for the OWLS Readathon Challenge Herbology to read a book that starts with M, and being book 7 in a series, it's kind of hard to talk about this book without being quite general because it is so far into the series. However, book 7 sort of wraps up the first major arc in the series, and then there are 3 more books that have a continuation arc from this plotline. In Magic Breaks, Kate comes face to face with Roland, who is the big bad magic force that she has spent her whole life being trained to hunt and kill. And it's probably not quite exactly what she expects to happen, but as a reader it is very entertaining to read. It's nice to get a bit more history about Kate and also about Roland, and to revisit all of those side characters that I love, including Andrea and Barabbas. I really enjoy this series. I meant to read more books from the series this week, but in the end I decided to hold off on them because I had other things I needed to read, and it's nice to hold some books in reserve that I know that I'm really going to enjoy, that are going to be comfort reads. Then I read Pucked by Helena Hunting. This was a 2015 release from Kindle Unlimited. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. And I read it for the drive-in movie challenge for Romanceopoly, which was to read a romance that starts as a one-night stand or a brief tryst. In this book, we follow Violet Hall, who is the sister of an NHL player, and she knows better than to get involved with hockey players because it has never really ended well for her in the past. And that's all well and good until she crosses paths with Alex Walters, who is the captain of her brother's hockey team, and the two have a one-night stand. And then Alex becomes enamored with Violet and begins to court her, and the entire courting process is really kind of adorable. And that was probably the part that I liked most, was just how tenacious and how persistent Alex was without being overly creepy. He did have some questionable moments where he does some very weird things because he's not sure how his relationship will play out in terms of his public persona and endorsement deals and whatnot, and that part was quite questionable, but the actual courting part was really adorable. Then I read The Unnie Munis by Christina Lauren. It was my first Christina Lauren book, and it's one that most people have said really good things about, which is why I picked it up. It was published in 2019 by Gallery Books, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I read it for the Care of Magical Creatures prompt for the OWLS Readathon, which was to read a book with a creature with a beak on the cover. This follows Olivia Torres and Ethan Thomas, who are the siblings of 2 people who are getting married, and at the wedding, the entire wedding party and all of the guests end up with food poisoning except for Olive and Ethan because they didn't eat the same food that everyone else did. The bride and groom had a non-refundable honeymoon booked for Hawaii, and so they are convinced to take this holiday on behalf of their siblings because they share similar names and no one will really question it. The only problem with this is Olive and Ethan do not get along, have never gotten along, and they have to weigh up the pros and cons of this trip and whether or not they can actually spend the entire trip in each other's company without killing one another. It is a hate to love, enemies to lovers romance set on a holiday island. It's a forced proximity trope, and it was just highly entertaining and I enjoyed it. Then I read Taking the Heat by Victoria Dahl. This is book 3 in the Jackson Girls Night Out series. It was published in 2015 by Myra and I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I read this because it is one of the Fated Mates book picks for the podcast, and for once I have read a book before I will listen to the podcast because I don't think it comes out until this week after this video goes live, so I'm really excited that I actually managed to get one in beforehand. It is a story of Veronica Chandler, who left her hometown in Wyoming to go to New York City and chase her dreams and live out her best career until she returns back to her hometown after her dream wasn't quite exactly what she expected. And so she's sort of disillusioned, but she's working in her hometown as a very successful advice columnist, and she writes her advice column every week, but she's also now been asked to do live versions of it because she's been so successful, which causes her minor stress because she's not very comfortable with public speaking, but she does it anyway, and it's quite highly entertaining because quite often her advice is all around relationships and sexual advice. And the whole thing is just highly entertaining when she has to give that advice in public. Her paths cross with Gabe Mackenzie, who is the new town librarian. And as the two get to know each other, they learn all sorts of different things about each other. And it's really quite cool how this relationship develops, because it does eventually develop based off trust and respect. Gabe sees Violet at her most stressed out when she's having to get up on stage, and then he also challenges her to push herself beyond her limits. I did really enjoy this book. It was a great romance, very steamy scenes. Beware of that going into it, but great. Then I read Becoming Prince Dracula by Kerri Maniscalco. This is book 3.5 in the Stalking Jack the Ripper series. It is a novella from Thomas Creswell's perspective that takes place after book 3. It was published in 2019 by Jimmy Patterson Presents, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I read it for the OWLS Challenge Potions to read a book under 150 pages. I think it's like 67 or 68 pages long, and it is Thomas Creswell's perspective for the last few scenes of Capturing the Devil, up until bridging to the next book. So the entire thing, I can't really talk about it because it actually spoils it, but it is Thomas's perspective as he goes through all of the events that happen and how he reacts to what happens to Audrey Rose. So it was fun. I love Thomas, and it was really interesting being back in his head because he's very entertaining to read from his perspective from, and he's got a very quick wit, but he's also very melodramatic. So the whole thing seems over the top, but it's very him and his character if you've read the series. So I really enjoyed it. Then I read Her Holiday Fling by Jennifer Snow. This is book 4 in the Wild Wedding series by Mills and Boon Blaze. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and I read it for the Defense Against the Dark Arts challenge from the OWLS, which was to read a book that was set on the coast or by the sea, and this book takes place in Maui. I've had this on my Kindle for ages. Being one of the Mills and Boon Blaze books, it's quite steamy, so just be aware of that going into it, but it follows Hayley Hanna, who is a divorce lawyer who has recently been in an article where she came across as a man-hating shark, and so her company has asked her to present her fiance that she said that she had in order to prove that she has some family values and she's a team player and whatnot. And she's to produce this fiance when they go on their corporate retreat to Maui. Obviously, she doesn't have a fiance. They broke up months ago, and she's concocting all of these excuses to give to her bosses when she gets to the island until she meets Chase Hartley, who is the passenger sitting next to her on the plane. And Chase is a police officer, and he is headed to Maui for his sister's wedding, and he really doesn't want to be there either. As the two talk about the various reasons why they're going on holiday, they concoct a plan to be fake partners for the duration of their various trips. So for Chase's sister's wedding, Hayley will be Chase's girlfriend, and for Hayley's corporate retreat, Chase will be her fiance. And the two have to play this off, and of course it never ends well because you've got your fake boyfriend, fake partner trope, and you know that they're going to get caught. It was entertaining and light and just funny, and it was really interesting to read 2 books set in Hawaii in a week because that was not exactly what I had planned. Then I read Alien Mate by Cara Bristol, which is book 1 in the Alien Mate series. It is a 2017 release from Kindle. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It is a sci-fi romance story in the vein of Ice Planet Barbarians, so take that as you will. It was light, fluffy, and very easy to read. Star Connor is wrongly convicted of murder and sent to a primitive frozen planet along with a bunch of other women to be the mail order brides of the local men there because the female population has died out and they need females there in order for the population to survive. That's basically the basic premise. There's a bit of a mystery thrown in there. There's some assassins, and it was just crazy and entertaining. That's all I can say. Then I read Guardian by Emma Chandler, which is book 1 in the Prison Planet series. Prison Planet? Yes, Prison Planet series. It is a 2018 release from Emerson Inc. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This one I also read from a podcast recommendation, but I can't remember which one it was. It was a podcast that was talking about the Prison Planet trope, which again is like a sci-fi romance type of story, but this is a very particular trope where people are stranded on an island, and it's where people are stranded on a planet. It's particularly a prison planet, and you get all your forced proximity and all of that sort of stuff thrown in there. So in this one, we follow Audra Copeland, who is wrongly convicted, because that's generally the trope with these stories, of a crime, and is shipped off to Rodon, which is the prison planet. And it's divided up into different sections, and each section has a men's and a women's camp. It turns out in the section that Audra is dropped off in, the women's camp and the men's camp have an understanding where some of the new arrivals will be sent off to the men's camp to keep them happy, and then the men won't raid the women's camp. And so it's sort of like this trade-off, which is very, very problematic in and of itself. Anyway, when the women who are chosen to spend the time at the men's camp go there, they have to choose one of the men for 6 weeks, I think it is. And that man is responsible for feeding them, clothing them, and protecting them in return for sex. Take that as you will. Severely problematic. But in terms of structuring the story, it was a really interesting concept to read. And I haven't read a lot of Prison Planet stories, so this was just interesting to see another version of it. And then I reread The Dry by Jane Harper. This is my work's very first book club pick, and I was so happy that I read it. I did finally get my physical copy. I listened to the audio as I read it, and it was really great. This is the first book in the Aaron Falk series. It was published in 2016 by Macmillan Australia, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Aaron Falk returns home to Kiowara for the funeral of his childhood best friend Luke, and it appears that Luke has killed his family and also committed suicide. It's really left the town reeling. Luke's parents ask Aaron, who is a federal police officer who works in fraud, to look at Luke and his wife's finances to see if there was some reason why something might have happened. They can't believe that he killed himself and his family, and they're trying to look for a reason. And Aaron is very reluctant to do it. He doesn't really want to be back in his hometown. It does not have very good memories for him, and he's not particularly welcome in the town because of events from his teenage years. But he does so out of respect for Luke's parents, and then discovers that maybe not everything is quite what it seems, and he teams up with the local police officer to investigate what really happened. It's a great story. It has 2 mystery plots that run simultaneously, one from Aaron's past and one in the current day, and it's just beautifully told. The language is incredible. Jane Harper writes amazing place, and it's so great. If you haven't read it, definitely pick it up. And then I read Attraction by Ruby Porter. This is a 2019 release from Text Publishing, and I think I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I read it for the Arithmancy Challenge for the OWLS to read a book that was outside my usual genre. This was the last book that I needed to read for the OWLS, and yeah, this was definitely outside my usual genre because I don't think I got it. I don't think I understood it at all. What I can gather from the story is that it is the story of a young queer woman who is on a road trip with her girlfriend and her best friend, and she doesn't really understand where she stands with herself or with her girlfriend or with her best friend. And yeah, that's about as far as I got with it. I did read the whole thing, and it's told in a very distinct style. It's not a strict narrative. It's sort of very lyrical, and it flashes forwards and backwards in time all the time, but it doesn't always tell you that when you start a new section. So yeah, there were times when I was confused. I had trouble keeping track of the characters. We never get the narrator's name, and it probably wasn't for me because it's more literary fiction than I would normally read. And the last book that I read this week was River Marked by Patricia Briggs. This is book 6 in the Mercy Thompson series. It was published in 2011. I read the Kindle edition and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The Mercy Thompson series is an urban fantasy series that involves werewolves and coyote shifters, as well as vampires, fae, and all sorts of myths and legends. And I loved this one so much because we actually begin to explore Mercy Thompson's Native American heritage, and it also begins to help her to understand her coyote shifter or her coyote walker side of her story. And I'm really fascinated by Native American mythology and legends and all of that stuff. I find that really interesting. So this story just spoke to me on so many levels because we started to unpack some of that in terms of the wider context of this world. So I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, being book 6, it's very hard to talk about specific events, but in very broad terms, in this book, Mercy begins to investigate a series of mysterious deaths and disappearances of people around a local river. And it turns out that there is something magical and dangerous living in the river, and it has a taste for people. So it was delightfully creepy and doesn't make me want to go onto water anytime soon, but it was really fun and I enjoyed it. So those are the physical books, and just imagine all the ebooks stacked on top of it that I read in the last 7 days. In the comments below, let me know if you have read any of these books and what your thoughts are on them. Alternatively, feel free to let me know what you have been reading in the last 7 days. I would love to know. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are staying safe and doing well, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye guys.